It is the 6th of August, 1945. In the blue sky over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, a plane emerges, the Enola Gay from the United States. Unnoticed by most of its inhabitants, a single bomb falls from this airplane, nicknamed Little Boy. Only seconds later, tens of thousands of people are dead. 50,000 more people die in the following hours, weeks, and months following the consequences of this explosion. This is the first use of a nuclear bomb against any population. 3 days later, another one follows, and strikes the Japanese city of Nagasaki on the 9th of August. This marks the last 2 deployments of nuclear weapons against the civilization population. Nevertheless, there are nuclear weapons still today, and what now exists is the fear of use of these weapons. For example, in the current conflict with North Korea, or conflict between India and Pakistan, or also the conflict between Russia and the United States. What would happen in such a case? What would happen in a nuclear war? I don't know about you, but if I hear the word atom bomb, then I can imagine what you might know from the old movies and media. A big bomb that is dropped from a plane and explodes. Unfortunately, the reality looks very different. With the build that you may have known from World War II, atomic bombs have little in common. These are state-of-the-art warheads, and these warheads are not dropped off the plane because that would be too risky. Instead, they are transported by launchers, and these rockets don't fly like planes in the sky, but fly above the atmosphere and then re-enter the atmosphere again. You can fly thousands of miles, but the most modern of launchers reach pretty much every point of the Earth. And something else is different. They fall to the ground and explode, but they explode several hundred meters above the ground, through a physical process known as nuclear fission. Nuclear fission takes place inside the bomb, releasing huge amounts of energy and triggering a destructive explosion. This explosion causes a blast wave that breaks everything in a giant radius. Whole houses are swept away, while cars and other objects fly through the air. You can only imagine what it happens to people. Immediately thereafter, a heat wave occurs at temperatures of 1,000 degrees Celsius. Survival in the area around the explosion is almost impossible. But even outside it is critical, because a short time after the detonation, the fallout is a kind of radioactive rain that extends over a large area. This radioactive material from the sky is in combination with the radioactivity released during the explosion. It is very clear when a nuclear bomb is used and where it detonates. The same applies to a hydrogen bomb, in which there is no nuclear fission, but instead a nuclear fusion, which is even more devastating than a nuclear bomb. Therefore, one could say that the use of a nuclear bomb, or nuclear weapons in general, would be pretty much the worst thing that could happen to the people in that affected area. Not to mention the power of nuclear weapons has greatly increased in recent decades. For comparison, the atomic bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima in 1945 had the blasting power of 13,000 tons. Modern weapons come to an explosive power of about 300,000 tons. So that's 23 times larger, and there are plenty of these weapons. Although now there are a few international disarmament agreements. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute assumes that there are around 15,000 atomic weapons worldwide, which 14,000 alone are in the hands of Russia and the United States. To get a good idea of the destructive power of these modern nuclear weapons, there is a website called NukeMap where you can choose any location on Earth, then pick a bomb and virtually let it go over in that area. Place it to explode over this city near Berlin, and there will be roughly 2.7 million deaths. It is estimated that 7 million people will die in Moscow, and as many as 8 million people will die in New York, and that's just an estimate. It is likely that many more people will be affected. Of course, you have to say that, and that's reassuring, but that's not so easy with nuclear weapons. No world's nuclear power can simply launch missiles with nuclear warheads and attack another country, though. Firstly, because you need a certain preparation time. Luckily, there are defense systems intercepting Russia, the United States, and other nuclear powers, and thus one can catch at least smaller or medium carrier rockets. Nevertheless, conflict analysis assumes that Russia, the United States, and even China will not even use their nuclear weapons so easily. Above all, they use them for deterrence. It may be different with even smaller nuclear powers like India and Pakistan, for example, or even North Korea. But what if it came to a regional conflict to use nuclear weapons? Of course, there is a lot of speculation, but we assume that the conflict with North Korea will actually escalate. That eventually North Korea sends a carrier with a nuclear warhead in the direction of the United States, or in the direction of Japan, or even in the direction of South Korea. What would happen then? It could be assumed that Japan or the US or both together would intercept the rocket and would strike back immediately. The result would be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of deaths in North Korea and beyond. And perhaps this conflict will even expand depending on how China and Russia react. This could maybe be the first steps in the direction of the Third World War, but that is a very far thought, and we should first think of the immediate consequences. Rutgers University, located in New Jersey in the United States. Here, researchers have some time ago started model experiments, and as they did in the early 1980s, carried on modern computer simulations and came to a dramatic conclusion. They assumed a conflict between India and Pakistan, and then they explored 100 atomic bombs. That way they would charge for every quantity of ashes and dust in the Earth's atmosphere, and 5 million tons of soot, and that soot would massively obstruct the Earth's solar radiation. The result would be a large temperature crash, in part by 10%, and a reduced precipitation all over the world for about 10 years. The entire ecosystem would be out of balance. Everywhere crops would fail. Entire tracts of land would be uninhabitable, and around 2 billion people would be threatened by starvation. And of course, the whole world would also see food prices rise. Bread would cost 5 to 10 times as much. There would not only be these serious ecological effects which generations would also feel after us, but also economic effects. Obviously, if entire countries fail in food production, it could come to distribution battles with all of us, not to mention atomic contamination. Refugee camps would spread all over the world, and many more. The prices on the stock exchanges would slip off, and there would be a world economic crisis with unpredictable consequences. Depending on where the atomic conflict takes place, it would also have an impact on the areas you may not even think of at first. For example, in South Korea and Japan, important components for computers are produced. Now they don't exist anymore. Another big problem would be the communication industry. Satellites would fail due to soot and ash in the atmosphere. For months, airplanes might even have to stay grounded for a time. And of course, that would have serious consequences on all of us. And we're only talking about regional conflicts when it comes to a nuclear war between Russia, the United States, and China. At that point, we may not even have to worry about what would happen because then we probably won't be around anymore. Nevertheless, there are some people who are worried about such a scenario. Becky Alexis Martin and Tom Davis, for example, two scientists in the British newspaper Guardian, have thought about what would happen in the event of a global nuclear conflict. Where would you be safest? They have come to a conclusion that you may be safest in the Antarctic or in the East, but at the same time they would be so uninhabitable that you would not survive for long. So that means no matter where and how nuclear weapons are used, it would always have dramatic consequences for Earth, not only for mankind, but for all life on Earth. I would be interested in what you think of the topic of nuclear weapons. Would you say they should completely go away and that they endanger us all? Or would you say they are a good deterrent like they were used in the Cold War? We would love to hear your feedback, so write it down in the comments below. And until the next video, everyone, stay safe out there.